Alright, hello everyone. Welcome to Guardians of the Galaxy, your guide to mastering third-party risk in the digital era. I'm going to kick us off today by introducing our host organizations and speakers. So first we have RSI Security, who is a premier managed IT security and compliance advisory service provider. We have professionals for all cybersecurity and compliance needs, from data privacy to PCI, healthcare data compliance, cyber defense, penetration testing, federal programs, and more. Those are just some of the services RSI specializes in as a full suite cybersecurity solution provider. Next, we have FortifyData, who is a cyber risk management company that performs on a platform to conduct automated security threat assessments that enables the enterprise to manage cyber risk across the organization. By combining automated attack surface assessments with assessment classification, risk-based vulnerability management, security ratings, and third-party risk management, you get an all-in-one cyber risk management platform. Now let's introduce the speakers. So first we have Eric Smith, who is a technical and operational leader with more than 20 years of experience spanning multiple industries. He's currently the Director of Technical Services Delivery at FortifyData, where he manages customer implementations of FortifyData's cyber risk management software and provides technical demonstrations on the platform. He's skilled in managing complex environments and frequently speaks at cybersecurity industry events and during training programs as well. Next, we have Jeff Messer with RSI Security. With over 2 decades in cybersecurity, information technology, audit, and risk management, Jeff is a seasoned professional specializing in cybersecurity assessments, compliance audits, and IT control assessments across diverse industries, including telecommunications, banking, and healthcare. Jeff brings extensive expertise. Active in professional organizations like ISSA and ISACA, Jeff is presently a vCISO security assessor at RSI Security. So with that being said, I will hand it off to our speakers today, Jeff and Eric.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction, Nico. Jeff, how are you feeling today?
Thanks, Nico. Yeah, I'm doing pretty good, Eric. How are you?
Not too bad. So, fun topic today, understanding third-party risk. One thing I can kind of start with here is, one of the main questions when we're talking to people is, why do I need third-party risk managed services or something like that? And people say I've got a well-secured perimeter, I've got my firewall rules all locked up, everything. I've got good vulnerability management and everything like that. And lots of times the IT team doesn't have a good connection with the vendor management team at all. And the vendor management team likewise doesn't know anything about cybersecurity. So what do you normally hear when folks come up and say, well, why do I need this? What benefit is it to me?
Yeah, well, I hear the same thing you hear, and like we know from being involved in this industry for a while, right? The breaches continue to rise, and I think that one of the things that people are surprised by is how many of those are impacted by third parties as opposed to a misconfiguration or something like that, right? It's still security fundamentals that cause a lot of the breaches, but some of those fundamentals are happening on the third party side, and I'm always surprised by organizations that haven't even thought about third parties as a risk factor, and yet that is an area where they might have a VPN connection, or they might have them plug into their network and connect directly online in their environment, and do all kinds of things without giving second thought to it, right? I one of the immediate ones that comes back to mind, it's getting a little old now, but is the Target breach in 2000. I think it was a little while back, but Target's breach, right?
I know which one you're talking about.
Which the HVAC vendor was targeted at. I've seen clients have that environment still today where their HVAC vendor is connecting into their environment, and there's no consideration whether or not that third party or other third parties they work with that connect to their environment or share data with or otherwise have ever even secured their systems to a level that this company would consider acceptable, right?
It's highly unlikely they have. How these people operate. And it's even more so than that, because you correctly pointed out, they can have links into your critical systems and everything, but there's even another vector that we're seeing, and the example I like to use is someone like an ADP. Doing your payroll processing. Now, they probably don't have a link to you to do what they do. Some may not, but They certainly have access to a lot of sensitive information on your employees, and they can use that for all kinds of nefarious purposes. So they don't even have to
Absolutely.
have a link to you. So
Right.
we always say it's either they have access to your sensitive systems or they have access to your sensitive data. And cyber
Right.
insurers are waking up to this in a big way, to the point where they're literally looking at your third parties as an extension of your attack surface, and rightfully so, if you ask me, because it doesn't matter if your
Right.
perimeter is very well secured. If they have a way over, under, or around it through connections or access to sensitive data, it might as well not be there.
Absolutely, and that's exactly the right way to think about it, as an extension of your environment. And you need to realize that if you're sharing data, if you're sharing anything with a third party that's of sensitive nature and is impactful to your business, or it'd be impactful if you had that compromised within your environment, that needs to be something you're looking at from a serious consideration from that third party's perspective, and how you're sharing it with them. Too often it's looked at as a business to business transaction, that
Hmm.
being engaging with a third party. And there's really much more than that, right? You have the compliance factors, regulatory, you have legal factors nowadays, and you're continuing to have more of those. Privacy is becoming a bigger concern as it relates to that information. And so, what these third parties are doing and not doing is really actually quite important. Besides the fact that when they have breaches, you're in the news potentially with them, but really because of you want to take the right precautions with your environment, with your data, with your customer information, whatever it is you're sharing and working with that third party on, so that you don't get put in the limelight, and your customers don't get brought in the limelight as well.
Well, you hit on something right there that I think is key when you said put someone in the limelight, because we as IT and cybersecurity professionals, the last thing we want to do is to gather attention to ourselves, usually because
Absolutely.
that something bad happened. But
Right.
the way to do that, look, if you're looking at your own environment, the way you keep yourself safe is you do not work reactively. You work proactively. You're trying to
Right.
find things before the bad guys do, and fixing them ahead of time. And most people are stuck in a very reactive loop with their third party risk management because, I mean, let's face it, if you do anything at all, what most people do these days is, well, I'm going to send them a questionnaire. And
Right.
you get that back. And then what do you have? Well, you've got a spreadsheet with some answers on it. Are the answers correct? Are they current? Did the guy,
Right.
shall we say, shade the truth a little? And what most people do is they just file those things away and they don't touch
Right.
them unless there's a breach. Whereas
Right.
if you're going into and actually doing risk management on your third parties, you're evaluating them actively and continuously. So
Correct.
you can actually know what you're up against. And as the situation changes over the contract term, you can take appropriate steps, either notifying the third party, or if you can't do that, or if they won't respond or whatever, then at the very least you can take actions on your side to
Right.
better prepare for the inevitable. You can compartmentalize things. You can change your recovery procedures and backup and alter your insurance. There are things you can do even if you can't make the third party make themselves more secure. But you can only do them if you know what's going on.
Right. Correct. And you're right about being proactive and being prepared are two key P's, if you will. We talk about people, process, and technology a lot of times. Well, there's two other P's in that kind of process there. But being proactive and prepared are really key to
Hmm.
this, because if you think about it, just run a mental exercise, right? Think about the last breach you read about in the newspaper. It shouldn't take long, but 30 seconds or so to flip through and find the last one, or flip through online, find the latest breach. And think if that was your vendor and you were working with them and now they were breached, how does it impact you? And if you have no
Hmm.
idea where to start, you probably aren't doing third party risk management at all, or you may not be doing it well. And you may have thought you were doing it well, but you'll find very quickly, if you take some of those and make it a tabletop exercise, right? Just kind of mental tabletop, whatever, run that through and see what it's like. I had a client that we ran through a tabletop exercise, and then we had a real world incident within 4 hours of the tabletop. And I
Hmm.
said, so we just talked about this a few hours ago. What's your next step? And they said, I don't know. And
Yep.
so we very quickly found out that tabletops are great and you need to do them, but you have to take them seriously and actually interact with it properly, or you might find that you actually are not ready when the incident happens. In that case, they had a 4 hour window and no one knew what they were doing at that point. We were able to get them on track. However, that's not what you want to find yourself in. That was a very simple incident, fortunately for them. It wasn't a big deal, but had it been a big deal, it would have not gone over well.
Well, one of the things I've always observed, both through bitter experience on my end and through things I hear from clients and prospects and so forth, is anytime there's an incident, either in your infrastructure or someone else's, and you do the postmortem, the after action report, whatever you want to call it, to look at what happened. You establish, how they did, what they got to, and everything. At some point, the light bulb goes on over your head, and you say, if I had only known X, I would have
Right.
done Y. And it's what I've always said in our industry. The two pieces of equipment we've always wished we had is a crystal ball and a time machine. But since those things aren't around just yet, I'm still working on my flux capacitor.
Right.
But since those things aren't around, the next best thing you can do is just have a continual eyeball on everything.
Agreed.
And not just an eyeball that generates reams and reams and reams of data that no one is ever going to look at, because that's another problem people are dealing with. It's not, in some cases, it's not that people are lacking information or lacking the data, it's that they're drowning in it. And
Right.
it's like running a sim with all the filters turned off, or an IDS IPS and that triggers on the lowest threshold. You're going to have so much noise. There's no way in the world you can pick out the relevant pieces of data in there. So you need something other than just a data gathering. You need something that actually does an analysis and analyzes it the way that you would if you being a cybersecurity professional, and spits out the
Right.
relevant details so that you can do what you need to do, which is take action.
Right. Well, and that's part of our RSI managed third party, or excuse me, RSI Security's third party risk management service offering, right? We have a tool that we do that with, and we use and offer to our clients so that they can do what you said, right? Do a continuous monitoring of their third parties, right? So you have the ability to, scale the environment, right? You can start off with a few vendors, right? And a lot of people that haven't done third party risk management properly, and again, this is from all levels of companies. This is not like just small companies or giant corporations that have this issue. It's everybody has this issue, and it's a constant challenge. But you can start off in a process, using our service offering, for example, and start off with just a handful of vendors. You take your most critical ones and run those through the gauntlet and see what you come out with, right? Look at what you have as far as what is your questionnaire like, right? If you don't even have one, we can provide that for you. You can actually customize the surveys and security questions. It gives active assessment capabilities, so you can do this on a as needed basis, whether that's monthly, weekly. In some cases, you might have vendors you need to work with a lot. If you're a smaller business, you may not need that. But we provide this opportunity for them, or provide this option for them, excuse me, to be able to look at that on an ongoing basis. Because it is a challenge. It is a challenge just to maintain the paperwork, let alone actually look at it and evaluate it.
Now, I want to call out something you said there for a moment ago about assessments being key to this, and kind of point out that not all assessments are created equal, especially when you're talking about the difference between an active and a passive style assessment. Because there's
Right.
obviously a lot of products in this space that will say, "Well, we'll run an assessment on these guys," and where they're getting that data and how current that data is rather important to the equation. One of the things I'll go comparison to is, let's say you're shopping for a house, and you go on Zillow, and Zillow lists it. Okay, it's a $400,000 house. Okay, well, are you going to stroke a check for $400,000 based strictly on what Zillow says? Of course not. You're
Right.
Now again, what are they doing? Well, they're checking the market. They're looking at the houses that are nearby. They're looking at what it sold for last time, and all this is historical passive information, and it's not valueless. But on the other hand, what if is it really a $400,000 house, or is a $250,000 house that needs 150 grand worth of work done on it?
Right.
And the only way you're going to know that is, what do? You get a home inspector. You get someone who's
Right.
actually going to go and look at it and check everything and look, and then come back and say, well, the foundation's cracked, the roof leaks, the AC's shot, etc. And that's information you just will not get via a historical passive type of an assessment.
Right. No, and they're, like you said, they're doing an inspection, but they're doing an assessment of the house, right? They're giving you a write-up of all those areas of concern. And those are things that are really what we have as our questionnaire, right? We have the things that are the concerned areas, and provide that in a way in which you can gather that information, but it's not just point in time only. It can be done again, and it can be done on an as needed basis, right? That's part of the challenge you mentioned earlier. Is a lot of these things are static or they're point in time, and people don't then go back to those very often, unless there's a breach, of course, right? Then suddenly all those things become very important. But there are things that you might need on a regular basis or ongoing basis, and having a tool like we're talking about that we offer in that service offering gives you that ability to do that in part.
Yep. Now, of course, again, some of the other stuff you typically run into here is, well, okay, fine. I can see what my third parties are doing, and now I've got all this information coming in. I've got questionnaires, I've got assessment results, I've got analyses that are coming in here. I'm the IT guy. I've got too much on my plate already. How am I going to, how am I going to wrap my arms around this? I don't have time. Even if the data is good and everything, I just don't have time to digest it. What does RSI do about that?
Well, we can offer we can offer additional support beyond just the portal and just the platform that we're providing, right? We can offer consulting services as well and help you understand those risks, or give you additional resourcing from that standpoint to help offset that, if you will. We can, whether that's the augmentation I mentioned, I think I mentioned that earlier. If I didn't, resource augmentation is one of those things, right? We talked about it being scalable, and giving you a way to do that by simplifying your vendor assessments through that interface is key to that.
Gotcha. Now, and you don't have to do every vendor to the nines that you have. I mean, we've got some clients in here who have, they got 5, 10, 15 vendors. We got some that have got a few thousand vendors. And most people tend to, and most people, what they do is they will, they'll tier their vendors. They'll say, okay, like, these are my uber critical vendors. Right. If something bad goes sideways with these guys, then my business is at dire risk for any number of things, and therefore I want to do the utmost, get the continuous assessments on these people, get a full questionnaire done on them. And everything. But then I've got my mid-tier folks where I may not need that level of scrutiny. I still want some, but maybe a little bit less. And then I've got the other folks, like the folks who run that supply the coffees to the break room. Do I really need to do everything with them? Probably not. And maybe I don't need to do anything with them. But again, they're even the janitorial service. Well, they have physical access to your facility. That's a risk. And there's a danger that's involved there. You need to be aware of that, and maybe even regulatorily are required to do so. So, RSI has a lot of different ways to handle that. Sorry, do you have something you want to throw in there, Jeff?
I was just going to say, no, you can keep talking. No, that's exactly right. And one of the things you mentioned that I wanted to come back to, because I didn't say that early on. I mean, one of the challenges that you have with third parties is the assessment, which we've been talking about, but it's also starting off with the criticality ranking, right? Kind of coming up with, who are my top tier, who are my most critical vendors, and going through that process isn't the hardest thing actually of the process, but it's something that does have to be done, because it'll limit down what you have as far as what you need, how much detail you need to get from each of your vendors, right? So understanding what a critical vendor is versus a non-critical vendor at the highest level, and then what is really critical versus what's in between there, right? And then taking those things and customizing your surveys, customizing your evaluations, defining the scope, and streamlining those processes based on the type of vendor you're working with will help in the process there, and the validation stages of your risk assessment process, or the risk management process.
And you just normally see people go in there, many people already seem to have a tiering set up in many ways. Do you frequently encounter that?
There are definitely groups that for sure do. However, I think a lot of people still struggle with that. It seems to be an ongoing issue of, help me understand that again, or somebody else comes in, and I think they get lost in the weeds, right? It's take a step back and just think about it at the highest level of, if this vendor was compromised, how bad would it impact us in all reality? Maybe that we have a logo on their website, but are we really doing stuff with them that's that impactful, right? Are they actually VPN'd or connected into my network regularly? Are they on my network? Am I sharing sensitive data with them? If not, it's probably not as critical as you might initially feel like it is, and then continue to notch down that, right? And that's where the surveys that we can provide, the evaluations and some of those kinds of things can help make that narrow that assessment down to just what you need. I worked in construction years ago, and there were two things I had to get from every third party we worked with: workman's comp and general liability certificates, and I had to get those every year. It's not that simple anymore, but it might be that simple for some of your vendors, and they're not the kind you have to worry about. Some of these third parties you work with might be that simple. I just need 2 documents from them. But others you're going to need much more substantial information from, and our process helps you to assess that, helps to define that, create the right scope of that environment, and then help you to manage that on an ongoing basis.
One thing I've also noticed is that a lot of times, and I think I mentioned this earlier, but the IT and cybersecurity team, in many cases, they don't liaise with the vendor management team and vice versa. They're almost like completely siloed off in too many organizations. And to really do this effectively, because here's what I end up seeing happening is the vendor management team knows who all the vendors are. They have no earthly clue who represents a risk to who, and they could be onboarding and offboarding vendors constantly in some cases. The IT team doesn't know what's going on because they're not in the loop. And one of the things that I try to encourage people to do is say, look, your vendor management team needs to be on the same page as the IT team and vice versa when it comes to this kind of stuff. Because Jeff, how many times have you come across this where you may be doing that survey and looking at these third parties, and you come up and say, well, hey, you've got a relationship with this third party here, and the IT team's like, I had no clue. And even if they,
that happens all the time.
Or if they do have a clue, they're like, yeah, I know we do business with them. I have no idea what they do or what they have access to. The vendor management team hit me up, 11 months ago and said this, and I built, I poked a hole in the firewall for this, but I have no idea what's going on with it. That's just too common.
Right. Absolutely. Exactly what you said is correct. And it's never a surprise when that happens. It one of these days I feel like it's going to be a surprise to me, but so far it's not been. I think it's just a surprise that it's still happening as a regular basis. But again, I think we're making traction in that way. And I think the tooling and the services we're providing from FortifyData and from RSI Security both are going to help get our clients to a place where they're able to properly manage their third-party risk.
Well, managing your third-party risk is, even though it's morphing and changing these days, one of the biggest things that still drives it in nearly every industry we deal with is security frameworks and people aligning with a particular one, be it NIST, ISO, PCI, GDPR, SOC 2, you name it. And tell me a little bit more about what RSI does with that specifically, and then because I have something that I want to throw in there about how we can help with that.
Well, yeah, that's just something that we, as part of the service offering, will help them align to a particular framework. So whatever that framework is that they're currently utilizing, as you just mentioned, most of them, there's still a number of other smaller ones out there, right? But as you mentioned them, we can help them align with that as they're doing for their process, or offer it and help them align that if they need one, if they haven't put one together so far, like if they're not using CSF or they're not using GDPR or PCI or something that they're already working with. We can work with them to help on that.
Well, the one thing that the FortifyData platform that we put in to kind of assist with this, and I'm a little proud of it because I'm one of the ones who suggested we build it this way in the first place, is the age-old problem, and I mentioned it, is that you send a questionnaire out to somebody, and usually it's just an Excel spreadsheet attachment. And then you have to send them 15 emails to remind them to complete it, and then they send it back to you and it's not done right, and you send it back and forth 5, 6, 10 times. Finally, when you're done, you've got, again, a spreadsheet and probably 90 documents of evidence files that you have no idea which questions they go to, and it's a mess. Everybody hates doing it. I absolutely hated doing those when I used to do IT. So one of the things that we built into the platform is something called a validation assistant. And it does something really, really cool because we can leverage the assessment results on that third party. Everything we found out about them and during their assessment, their dark web, their breach history, whether they're using TLS 1.0 versus 1.1, whether they've got log4j exposed. I mean, all the stuff that you can get by probing them. And again, that's a massive amount of information. And usually what you'd end up having to do is you look at your questionnaire, you see how they answered it, and then you have to go through all that results, assuming you have them. Heretofore, you haven't had them. And then try to make sure that what they told you is correct. What the validation system does is it removes that step from the process. We've actually trained it to understand what the questions mean, and they go through the assessment results, find just the nuggets of information that are pertinent to that question and surface them. So if you're asking somebody a question of like, well, are you using minimum TLS 1.2 across all of your public-facing infrastructure? Well, our system will go and check, and if it found that they're using something less than TLS 1.2, it's going to pop up and it's going to say, we found TLS 1.1 on this asset over here, and this one over here too, and that one over there. And that immediately tells you, okay, I need to go back to that vendor and tell them, well, you said yes here, but the data it contradicts you. So you need to either touch up your answer or give me some kind of something that justifies why I can accept this as an answer. And you haven't had that ability before.
Right, and that's hugely valuable information, right? I mean, it's tangible. It's and there's an objectivity to that that's not requiring the user to necessarily provide that, right? Or having to get to that technical detail, right? Which TLS version are you using? What's TLS?
Exactly.
I mean, a lot of times a person filling out the security questionnaire on the other end does not understand what they're being what they're being asked, and so when you start getting those more technical details that actually do matter and are commonly brought out in breach reports, it matters that they understand what that is. By providing some of that ahead of time, this could be beneficial for both parties.
Well, yeah, and I didn't mention it, but you brought it up here on this, is that that particular function is available to both the third parties filling it out while they're filling it out, and to you when you're checking what they're saying. Because let's face it, many times these third parties, let's go back to the old HVAC vendor that breached Target. Do you really think that they've got a top-notch, top-tier cybersecurity guy on staff there at at Joe's HVAC shop? Probably not.
Right.
So he's, like you said, in many cases they're not going to understand the question. Or even if they do understand the question, in many cases they may not have the tools to evaluate themselves, to know this about themselves. Right. Or the other case I run into is sometimes they're out there and they had a pen test that was done, but it's 10 months old. And things have changed since then. Yeah. But they're going to base their answers on that 10-month-old pen test like it was done yesterday, even though it's definitely not still valid, or at least shouldn't be considered that way.
No, that's correct.
But yep.
Yeah, and having a controlled environment, we kind of leave that assumption there, but right, having a controlled environment like this, to your point about passing back the documented questionnaires, having that place where that information is being populated in a particular way helps to control that input and give it a higher likelihood of it being the right information, right? But also making it so that there's not a back and forth where something gets missed either in that documentation that gets passed around. The vendor security questionnaires, third-party questionnaires, whatever you want to call them, those going back and forth a lot of times get misaligned or have information that was addressed in one but not addressed in the other, and so things get missed. It takes a lot of the back and forth out of the process and streamlines.
Well, it also takes the nice thing about it is it takes out that Excel spreadsheet part of the equation, which I always despised, because
I agree. Absolutely.
Because again, it got blocked by my spam filter. Oh, and I accidentally saved it over the prior version or whatever. It's when you've got a platform that you send them an invite to it and says, hey, you've been invited to fill out a NIST 853 on this platform. Click here to begin. They log in, the questionnaires there, they start filling it out, they see the validation assistant results, they can put in their justifications, they can upload their evidence files. The other thing that's really cool about it is the evidence files. If you upload an evidence file for a specific question, it stays linked to that question. So then when you're looking over that questionnaire afterwards, you're saying, okay, well, I got a network diagram here. What the heck is this supposed to go to? Well, it takes that ambiguity out of it. You see the network diagram; it must be meant for this question.
Definitely.
Which is lovely.
Right. No, absolutely, and I think that's another key thing, right? The artifacts that you use to support the assertions in the questionnaires a lot of times are misplaced or do not come with it in the
Hmm.
right way. There's no easy way to do that typically, but I think in addition to all these things we've been talking about, one of the other benefits we haven't really hit on yet is the
Hmm.
dashboard, right? Because one of the things that you may have all these questionnaires filled out, even if you had them all 100%, they're not typically rolling up in a way that's meaningful for anybody above you or even to the side of you, and then they can quickly look and say, so what is our risk overall? What does it look like with all these vendors we're working with? We captured all this information, but what does that
Yep.
mean? So I think the dashboard. Maybe talk about that a little bit to highlight a couple different things there.
Well, will do. And dashboards, of course, you've seen one dashboard, you've seen a million, and they're all
Well,
designed to give you the. And I'm going to hesitate to use the salesperson talk where they think a single pane of glass,
of
when
course,
everybody says that,
right.
but yeah, its purpose is there to give you a high level overview of what's going on with your overall environment, so you can at a glance, look at certain metrics. All right, so let's take a look at the dashboard here. I brought it up so everybody can see it. And like I said, it gives you your high level details across all of your third parties. And you're looking at, you've got hundreds of, or maybe thousands of third parties. Of course, it can be very useful to get a high level view. So you break them all down into scoring bands. You can see where the majority of them are. You can look at them on the heat map and see who's performing where and who's doing what. Then down below, there's a tile-based interface where you can pick and choose different data points you want to monitor across all of your third parties simultaneously, which is handy. And then if you got a lot, you may even want to
Yeah.
look at a subset. So you can filter down here. You can filter by a whole bunch of different criteria, risk level,
Oh wow.
classification,
Yeah.
size, industry, etc. The other thing we let you do is you can actually tag all of your third parties with an arbitrary number of arbitrary tags, and this effectively lets you build custom filters if you want to go down that road. It's also got a
Right.
role-based access control system built into it. So if you've got multiple users that need to access this, but you say, well, Jay needs to monitor these 50 third parties, but Joe needs to monitor those 50 third parties, and I don't want the two of them getting anything confused. You can restrict it so that they can only see and do certain things within the platform and kind of keep them from stepping on each other's toes. But that's the high level details. If you want to dig into it even further, then you go into the portfolio view where you're able to see all of your third parties by name and their risk to you, their score, recent changes to their score, any alert conditions. Of course, we've got the whole
Yeah.
compliance thing in here. So if you've issued questionnaires, you can see, are they compliant? What have they completed? If they've completed anything at all. And then if you've chosen to continuously monitor
Yeah.
them, you get a score histogram, so you can see, are they trending up, are they trending down, what's going on with these guys. Uh,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just having an interface like this, I think, is also key. That's a challenge I see a lot of companies challenged with is keeping this information in a centralized
Hmm.
location where it's easily accessible. So you have like the questionnaire, you have maybe a vendor intake form where you have the core information for the business, the billing person, that kind of stuff. But just having a place where you can go in here and see the critical information you need on an ongoing basis, and having that aggregate across your vendors, right? That's something that we haven't talked about much on here, but the aggregate risk in your environment is something that most companies I've seen really
Hmm.
underestimate if they've even heard the term aggregate in regards to risk. It's something that really should be thought about, because if you miss your vendors, you will affect that aggregate. But if you don't document them appropriately, you won't understand what your aggregate risk is. And you might think, based on all the vendor assessments you've done, oh, it's not so bad, we're not so bad off. But when you throw those together in a tool like this and you look at it, you might be right, but you also might have miscalculated some things and realized you actually have taken on more risk than you realized with some of your vendors. And so having that information readily available, as well as the ability to quickly go back to that vendor and say, hey, you know what, I missed a couple things I need to get from you when we did this process before manually. Can I get a few more details here and get that plugged in here to see what your risk score looks like then? That's a substantial change in what they were probably doing before, or giving them some substantial ability compared to using Excel spreadsheets or documents going back and
Well,
forth.
and you also mentioned something else here about the ability to keep track of this stuff. Keep in mind, all this is continuously updated, and a common
Right.
scenario: you wake up, you check your news feeds, you find out there's a brand new vulnerability. It's going to be coming out. It's going to make your life horrible for the next several weeks. And your first concern is, okay, is my company affected by that? But your second thought needs to be, are any of my third parties affected by that? And we've actually built, for talking about aggregation here, we've actually built a filter for that. So you can come in here. We update this list on a daily basis from the entire CVE database. And if there's a new vulnerability that comes out that you're wondering about, well, do any of my third parties suffer from it? Well, you can just come in here. Let's assume it's a PHP vulnerability here. You just make a filter out of it, and then anybody who suffers from that, you can see that immediately. It's so simple that some folks are like, no, that can't really be working the way you say it is. But no, that's actually what it's doing. Right. And then you can even go into even more detail on the third parties, because this was what I call the medium level detail. But you can drill in even further and see their global distribution of assets, listing of all of their public-facing assets along with scores. You can see all of their vulnerabilities and how long they've been hanging out unremediated. Right. You can drill all the way down to the port and the protocol and the asset that's involved on everything. Like you can see this guy here, he's running some weak ciphers. And normally when you think weak ciphers, right, you're going to think, oh, TCP 443. But as you can see, we're checking a lot more than 443, and you find this is pretty much everywhere on this poor asset. And this is the kind of information you need, and there's a CVE out for it. And this is the information you need to know in order to accurately judge what's really going on here. And then
and this is stuff you can't get through the. Please go ahead. Talk you there, Eric. But this is the stuff you can't get through. You can't get through this through your questionnaires.
It's impossible.
This is stuff that you're not going to be able to get, not only on an ongoing basis, but you're not going to be able to get that from the person who's filling out that questionnaire. Nope. You have to have this enhancement elsewhere.
Oh, and how about this? Here's a nice little thing. Call it the truth meter. So you reach out to Wayland Yutani Corporation here, and you tell them they got a problem on this asset, and he gets back to you in a few days. Okay, I fixed it. Well, how do you know he's fixed it? And how do you know he fixed it right?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, the cool part about this is since it's continuous, you're going to know, because if he does fix it, it will automatically move from here over to here, and you'll be able to see everything that he's ever fixed and when he fixed it and how long it took him to fix it. And this is really handy. This is something we haven't really talked about, because we've talked about risk, but there's other bits and pieces of it. Like you could have SLAs with your vendors, and you could put into your contract language. I bet more people are doing this now, and saying you must fix, for example, critical vulnerabilities within 30 days, something like that. Well, now you can actually check to see if they're doing this. It goes far beyond the ability to just vet somebody, either A, when they're onboarded, or B, once a year. It's the kind of thing where you can.
It's a very powerful tool.
And not just that, but you can see every open port they're advertising and all the services, all their applications, checking their email, all the usual stuff, DKIM, DMARC, SPF, Open Relay, reputational analysis for the domain.
Right.
You can derive their patching cadence, because you can see what patches they're missing. You can check their breach history. Say, have they ever had any public breaches? You can see, are they exposing any dark web creds, including any of yours? And then, of course, there's the usual questionnaires and everything where you can actually go in. In fact, here's probably a good opportunity to show you what the related findings look like, where you're able to go in here and see this information and see, okay, well, hey, you've got open and secure ports here. You're running the port 80. And again, that could be perfectly legit. We're not going to answer the question for them, because there could be a reason for this. But what we're doing is we're calling attention to it, so that both you and the vendor knows that this is there, and can verify that, okay, this is everything I was expecting. Oh, wait a minute, I've left a 21 port open. Oh, was that intentional? That kind of thing.
Right.
So.
No, and that happens all the time. I mean, I've got plenty of stories of that with clients and their firewall configs, where they hooked up a new acquisition, and suddenly the acquisition has access to the network, but they shouldn't. But that's because the firewall was misconfigured from a prior period where it wasn't changed. Right? Things like that happen. You put up a new asset, and suddenly that asset's compromised. You're like, well, how's that possible? It's not internet facing. And well, the firewall said it was internet facing because last time there was an asset with that same IP address, and no one changed that. So those kinds of details that pull in here, and the questions and answers, the back and forth that prompts is pretty substantial, and can be actually helpful to organizations that don't even realize they have a gap in an area they didn't think they had a gap in.
Yeah, I mean, and this it goes back to what you were saying earlier on that, Jeff, is that on the one hand, you have to do your due diligence to make sure that you're keeping the company as safe as you can from external people that you have very little insight into otherwise, and almost no control over.
Right.
But the other thing you can do, you can actually invite your vendors in to see their own results in here. It comes with this.
Right.
So if you onboard Wayland-Yutani Corp, you get to see all their dirty laundry. And then maybe you make buddies with a guy at Wayland-Yutani Corp, and he's like, man, where are you getting all this information from? Because we don't have any access to that. You say, well, okay, here's a login. And then they can see all this information.
Right.
And then what we found is that actually motivates people to fix things. And if their security improves,
Yep.
your security improves. Everybody wins.
Yeah. That'd be the win-win, right?
Well, that's what we hope for anyway. That's the ideal. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
what the interface looks like and how it all works and everything. A lot of the big, I guess, a few things I didn't really bring up. There's a document repository in here, so if you've got contracts and other just miscellaneous documents you want to store on your third parties, we can store that. There's an in-scope function. Let's say you host with Microsoft. You're in Azure, okay? You could and will allow you to evaluate all of Microsoft.com if you want to, but is that really what you want to do? You're going to pull back information on 50,000 things that you could care less about, and somewhere in there is going to be the 20 or 30 or 100 things that you do want to look at. So you can actually scope down your assessments. It's very useful in larger companies, or if maybe there's a subsidiary of the company that you're doing business with, that you want to look at that and only that for the purposes of your evaluation. The other thing I think that comes to mind is certain industries, regulatory-wise, they may have some very specific guidelines about how risk must be evaluated. We ran into this a few years back with a government client. And you say, I like your scoring model, and we explain how it all works and everything. That's great. He said, but I have to look at risk a very specific way. And so we actually have a custom scoring model, or I'm sorry, it's called it's a custom risk modeling, where you can actually define a scoring model that you can build however you want it to be, with weights and thresholds matching what you need them to be, and then generate your own scoring system for your third parties. It's pretty handy if you're in that kind of a regulatory place where you need to be able to do that.
Yeah, well, thanks for pulling that up. That was a great walkthrough.
All right. The big difference here is what we're talking about is actively managing third-party risk. And the key word here is actively. It's not reactive. You're actually doing something and getting access to information that you didn't have before, and that enhances your cybersecurity. You can't neglect this, because again, if you're sitting back inside your fortress walls, thinking that you're all safe, and then this is going to come at you from a very unexpected direction, you're not going to be prepared for it, and it's going to cause all the more havoc because of all that. I used to. I'm a former Marine, and one of the things my drill instructors, they used to say. He told me is the old saying is, "What you don't know can't hurt you." No, that's the absolute opposite of reality. It's what you don't know is exactly what hurts you. And in this case, if heretofore you have not had a way to know anything about your third parties, and this changes that dynamic drastically.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much, Jeff and Eric. I really appreciate your time today and that insightful conversation. It was great. And thank you so much to everyone in the audience for joining us today for Guardians of the Cyber Galaxy, Mastering Third-Party Risk with RSI Security and FortifyData's Shielded Solutions. Our contact information will be attached in the description below. Contact us for more information on RSI Security and FortifyData's services, and stay tuned for upcoming episodes and exciting cybersecurity topics. Thanks, everyone.